Hey, what's going on? It's Evan here from Evan Root Effects, and today we're going to set a mannequin ablaze. In the scene file for this tutorial, I won't be able to include this character, and that's simply because I don't own it, but fortunately it can be downloaded for free from Mixamo. So just head to mixamo.com and you'll be able to get any of these characters or animations for free. And the one that I'm using, if you go to page 1, you'll see this mannequin right here, or you can use the search here at the top left. And so what I like to do is, instead of downloading the character with animation, I like to download the character in a T-pose and then download the animation separately. And the reason why is because if you want to try out different animations and you're downloading the character geometry every time, you're gonna get hit with a whole bunch of large files, when in reality all you need is the skin once, and then you can just append the animations later on, and we'll see how to do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna choose this mannequin and hit use character, and then I'm gonna head over to animations, and if you type in pose and hit enter, you'll be able to see this T-pose right here. And if you hit download, and I'm not sure why it has a frame rate, because there's no motion. If I refresh the page after doing that, let me try something. Yeah, I can see the frame rate goes away. And so you're going to download this. You're going to download this, and this is going to be your character in a T-pose. And then after that, we're going to download the animation. So now I'm going to search for running. And I believe the one that I chose in the tutorial was this one. Let me do in place. Yeah, this was the one that I went with, but you don't have to choose that one. You can choose another one, whatever you like. It doesn't have to be running. You could choose any of the animations they have here. And so we're going to hit download. And I like using 30 frames per second with these animations because I like how smooth it looks as opposed to 24. And so when you download it, where it says with skin, that's pretty much just the geometry. So you're going to choose without skin. And then this is going to give you that animation, or I'm sorry, it's going to give you just the mocap skeleton. And so it's not going to have the geometry. And so if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that the file size is around, I think it's like 30 megabytes with the geometry. And if you're just downloading the mocap skeleton, it's like 300 kilobytes or something. So it's definitely worth doing it this way. And once you've done that, we can continue with the rest of the tutorial. All right, now here we are in Houdini, and let's get started. We're going to start on creating the source for the pyro simulation. So I'm going to switch this over to 30 frames per second because that's what we downloaded our mocap in. So I'll just hit apply FPS there. And then I'm also going to close the shelf since we don't need it. And I'm going to type in geometry to create a geometry object. And I'm also just going to rename this to setup. And then once inside, we're going to create a cop network because that's where a majority of the work is going to be happening. I'm going to rename that to pyro setup. And we're going to import the motion capture, and we need to do that in a geometry network. So we can do sop geo, and I'm going to rename this. Go inside, and now we're going to import the mocap, and we can do that using an FBX character import. And I'm going to select that FBX file and make sure to grab the character, not the animation. And now we're going to grab that animation clip, so we can do FBX animation import. And we're going to select that animation file, so I'm going to do the running.fbx. And then we're going to do a joint deform. And if we hold J and click and drag this and drop, it'll connect all the wires. But we're going to take this animated pose and drag it into the FBX animation, and then we're going to put the display flag here, and we should see our character start to move. And I'm going to limit it to real time so it's not playing too quickly. And I'm also just going to limit the frame range to 100. And here's our character. And I think the reason why the character isn't moving forward is because I selected in place before downloading the character. But in case you didn't do that, there's an easy fix. You can just do extract locomotion and plug that in. And you're going to want to choose the locomotion joint, and that's usually just going to be the hips. And this little red thing right here, it just represents a locomotion that's been removed. All right, perfect. Now we need to cycle this so that it lasts longer. I'm going to see how long our animation is. So it ends on frame 22. So I'm going to create a sticky note, and I'm just going to put 22 just so I remember which frame that the animation ends on. And let's convert it to motion clip. And it's going to give us an error, and that's because it needs to be converted back. So let's do motion clip evaluate. And then that should be working as normal. But what we need is a motion clip cycle, and that's going to allow us to cycle the animation. So we're going to put that between the motion clip and the motion clip evaluate. And we're going to set the cycles after to 10. And this is just going to cycle it 10 times after. And there is an issue. It's hard to spot at first, but it's definitely noticeable. Frame 22 is the same as frame 1. So if I'm on frame 22 and if I go to 1, it's the same frame. And so if I go from frame 22 to frame 23, since it's cycling back to frame 1, it's going to be the same. I'm not sure why Mixamo includes the last frame. They include this last frame, which is the same as the first. It should really end at frame 21, because if you're cycling it, you would be going back to the first frame. So it makes no sense to append the first frame at the end, because then you just get a duplicate frame. So frame 22 and 23 are the same. So if we go here to the frame range, we can just limit the frames that are being used, and then we can just go to frame 21. And so now when we go from 22, instead of going back to 1, it'll automatically go to the second frame. And so now we no longer have that extra frame that's duplicated. And now we can move on to adding the pyro source. So we're going to scatter a whole bunch of points on the static version of this geometry. And I'm going to set the, force total count. I'm going to set this to 10,000. And I don't need any of those attributes. So I'm just going to use an attribute delete. And I think I'll just do delete non-selected so that everything gets removed. And we just have our points by themselves. Next, let's add a rest position, and we're going to be using this rest to control noise later on. And then we need to get these points moving. So we can do that using a point to form, and we'll plug the first input into that rest. And then the second input will be just this geometry, the geometry of the character at rest. Then the third one will be the animated or the deformed pose. And so now if we put the display head here, we should see our character moving, these points moving along with the character. Next, I think I'm just going to move the character up a little bit because it's getting really close to the ground. So I'm just going to use a transform and raise that up a little bit. It's just because I don't want it to be super close to the boundary of the domain of the pyro simulation. So I'm just going to move this up just a little bit. And we're also going to want the velocity, so we can calculate the velocity by using a trail sop. And we're going to switch this from preserve original to compute velocity. And if we turn on the display point trails, we should see the point trails for our velocity. Now we need to create the actual attributes that will be rasterized. So let's go and do an attribute create. And I'm going to create two attributes for the pyro simulation. The first one will be density, and the second one will be temperature. And I'm going to set both of them to a value of 10. And I'll set this one to 10 as well. And let me just check the spreadsheet to make sure that's working. So we have density, and then we have temperature, and then there was our rest attribute that we created. All good. And so now we're going to rasterize these using a volume rasterize attributes, and this is going to create a volume out of these points. And right now nothing's happening, and that's just because we haven't selected anything to rasterize. So we can select our density. We'll do that first. And I'm also going to just erase the coverage attribute, and then I'm going to do normalize coverage to keep it smooth. And right now it's super big just because we don't have a P scale, and so it's just defaulting to a P scale of 1, which is going to be way too big. So let's do attribute adjust float. And the cool thing about this is that it's already going to be on P scale by default. So as soon as you plug it in, you'll see it disappear. And that's just because the P scale is set to 0. So let's go over here, and we're going to switch it from constant to noise. And we need to change these min and max values. So for the min, I'm going to do 0.08. And for the max, I'm going to do 0.012. And that's a lot better. It's a little bit difficult to see right now, and that's because our voxel size is way too big. So for now, let's just do let's see. 0.01. Yeah, 0.01. That'll be good for now. And something else that I wanted to is for the rest position, or not for the rest position, but the location attribute, we want to switch this to rest, so it's using the rest attribute rather than the position. And I will demonstrate why with this next attribute adjust. So we're going to put down another attribute adjust. This time we're going to switch it to be temperature. And we're going to switch it from add to multiply. And we're going to visualize this attribute. And I'm going to change the visualization over here. I'm just going to switch this to white to red just because it makes it easier to see. And I'm going to switch this to noise. And if we scrub through, it looks like our element size is too big. So I'm going to go down to like, let's see, 0.3 maybe. And then I'm just going to drag this over here a little bit to the right. And so if we play this, it looks like the character is going through the noise and the noise isn't sticking to the character. And that's why, like if we look at this foot right here and move, you can see that it's going from white to red, but we want the noise to be stuck on the character. And so that's why we use that rest attribute. And so now if we play, it looks like the noise is stuck to the character, which is much better. And so that's why we use that rest attribute. So I'm going to put the display flag back on here, and I'm going to switch this right here where it says visible volumes. I'm going to switch that to temperature. And let's go ahead and add temperature here and velocity because we're going to be rasterizing all of those. But for now, let's just view the temperature. And we can see that this noise is altering the look of the temperature, which is great, but I want to change the element size just a little bit smaller. So where is that? We'll scroll down, and then I'm just going to do 0.055. And then I'm going to go to animation. I'm going to turn on animate noise and do 0.1. And this is just going to animate the noise pattern over time so it doesn't look exactly the same. So let's go back to the volume rasterize attributes, and we're going to switch the visible volumes to density because that's the only one that we really need to see. And then I'm going to go to a frame where the foot is moving really quickly. And I'm going to do a volume visualization. And I'm going to connect that, and I'm just going to make the density a bit higher just so it's easier to see. And then I'm going to go back to this node, and we're going to turn on velocity blur, and that's going to just smooth it out. And let's put this up to 1 so that it's sampling a longer time. And then for the blur samples, I'm going to switch this to 8 just to smooth it out a little bit. And we want this velocity blur on because the source is moving quickly, and that's going to help the pyro simulation so it won't look as stepped. It'll be nice and smooth even when parts of the simulation are moving quickly. So I'm going to get rid of this visualization because we don't need it anymore. And I'm going to do an output, and this will guarantee that no matter what the display flag is on, this node will always be the output of this network that we have right here. And then the very last thing that I'm going to do is add a cache node. And the reason why I'm going to add this cache node is because we're trying to work in real time, so we want everything to go as quickly as possible. Now, if you don't have a lot of RAM, you do need to be careful so that you don't run out. What this cache is going to do is just cache everything to RAM, so once it evaluates once, the next time it won't have to evaluate again. Now, of course, if you change something above it, it will have to evaluate again. But just to show you how it works, I'm going to hit play, and now everything has been cached out, and it'll be able to play much faster. Now, it's not playing any faster now, but that's just because we have the real-time toggle off. See, if I take that off, it's going to be able to play much faster. See, if I put the playhead back on the volume, you can see that it slows down. And so I just like working like this just because it's going to speed things up. And we're probably going to increase this resolution at some point, so it'll be even slower. So we definitely want to make sure that this thing is cached out. And I think that's pretty much it for now. And we're going to move on to the next part, which is creating the pyro simulation. Let's create a control for the voxel size. I'm going to select this node, and I'm going to go to the edit parameter interface. I'm going to find float, drag it over, and I'm going to rename it to voxel size. And for the range, I'm going to do 0 to 0.1. And then for the channels, I'm going to set the default to 0.01. Actually, no, that should work. Yeah, 0.01, that'll be fine. And then I'm going to right click this, do copy parameter, and then I'm going to go to the volume rasterize attributes, and then I'm going to go to the voxel size and do paste relative references. And now we can control the resolution of our pyro sim by using this voxel size right here. And now, in order to use these VDBs that we have in the simulation, we're going to need a VDB to layer, or geometry to layer rather. So let's do geometry to layer, and I'm going to drop that down. Oops. Plug that in. And we're going to do set imports from geometry. And I'm going to reorder these just so that they match how the pyro simulation has it ordered. So I'm going to move velocity so that it's in the center, and then we can do pyro block. And it's going to create these 3 nodes for us. And we don't need the pyro configure because we already have our own controls for the volume. Like, for example, we have the voxel size right here. So we don't need that other one. And so we can plug all of these in respectively. And everything is looking good so far. And we're going to use this cable. And what this cable does is it takes all 3 of these inputs, or these outputs rather, and it packs it into one cable so that we can access it later. So if we take this, it says cable of all outputs, and then we plug this into here, then we can use an unpack later on so that we can access all of these inputs inside the simulation. But for now, let's just make sure the simulation is working. So I'm going to hit Alt and click on this bottom feedback wire, and I'm just going to drag it down. I'll do the same on the end. And this is just going to help separate out these wires. And I think I'll do the same for the density. I'm just going to drag it up. And I'm going to do a pyro dissipate. And I'm going to plug that in. And I'm just going to put the dissipation rate to something high. And I'm just going to put the display flag on the pyro block end. And we can see our densities fading. So the simulation is working. It just looks like our sources aren't being added every sub-step. So let's fix that. We don't need this pyro dissipate anymore. So I'm going to get rid of that. We want to add density into our simulation. And so we need to use this density from this right here and add it in. And that's why we use this cable right here. So let's use a cable unpack. So I'm just going to type in unpack. And if we drag this pass through into the cable, and then we hit set fields from input, we'll see that all of our VDBs we have access to right now. And so I'm just going to do a simple add operation. I'm going to take the density and plug that into the background. And then I'm going to take the density from our cable unpack and then plug that into the foreground. And so now when we play it, we can see that density is being added into the simulation. And we're going to do something similar for temperature and velocity. For temperature, let's do that. I'm going to use a maximum operator instead of add. And so we'll do the same thing for the background. We'll grab the temperature, and then from the foreground, we'll grab the temperature from the cable unpack. And let's take this blend right here, and I'm going to plug that output into the temperature. And then we need to do the same thing for the velocity. And I'm just going to color these nodes just to make it easier. What I like to do is I like to take all of the temperature nodes and make them one color. So I'm going to make all of these ones yellow. And then for the velocity nodes, we don't have one yet. I'm going to make those pink. So I'll do another maximum because we're going to do maximum for the velocity as well. And if you hit Shift S, it'll switch between the wire types. And so you'll probably see me switching back and forth between them. And so that's Shift S that does that. And for the maximum, since we're using a vector, we need compare lengths turned on for this one. So for the background, we'll grab our source over there, and then we're going to grab the cable unpack velocity and put it in that one. And then I'm going to hit C. And in case you didn't catch that earlier, it's C that you hit to bring up the color. And then let's color this one pink. And then I'm going to hit C to make that go away. And then I'll drag the blend into the velocity. And now when we play this, we should see something that looks more like a pyro simulation. Now let's go set up the visualization for the pyro simulation. So make sure your display flag is on the pyro block end. That's very important for this next part. And I'm going to go back out to the setup, or I guess the setup is just what I've named it, but go out here to your cop network. And let's see, I'm going to go check my other scene just to see what I added. Okay, so by default, you're only going to be seeing the density, but we want to have access to all of the volume. So where it says single output, I'm just going to click on that. And now we're going to see density, velocity, and temperature. Now all of these volumes are going to be visible, and it's going to look weird. Like seeing the velocity looks weird. So I'm just going to hide the velocity and temperature. And you can do that with the primitive property. So I'm going to wire that in. And then for the source group, we just need temperature and velocity. And then I'm going to go to the volume section and then adjust visualization. And I'm just going to hit invisible so that way only the density is going to be showing. And now let's add a pyro post process. And make sure convert to 16-bit float is turned on. And that's going to save space when we cache later on. And then the same thing with resample. This is going to resample the velocity field to 2 times bigger, and that's going to help save space. And make sure compute min-max values is on. Now this is actually going to slow it down. This can slow down when you're trying to view the simulation in real time. So I'm going to disable it for now, but we'll turn it back on later when we need it. And then finally, we need a volume visualization node. So I'm going to wire that in. And then let's see. I'm going to set the density to 2.2. And I'm going to switch the mode from clamp ramped to no ramp. And then let's switch over to the emission tab, and we're going to use temperature for all of these. Let's see. So for the color and emission field. And then I'm going to set the scale to 150. And now we can see that the fire is come in, and this is looking a lot closer to a fire simulation. And then let's see. I'm going to lock the viewport, and the reason why is if we go back into the pyro simulation, the viewport is going to follow where we moved. And so we don't want to see inside here. What we want the viewport to be locked to is this volume visualization node. So if we click on this where it says following selection, I'm going to click the lock button. And then this time when we go into the pyro setup, it's going to be locked to where that other node is. And so we'll be able to properly see the visualization. All right, now let's do a little bit of lookdev on this pyro simulation. I'm going to go check the voxel size. I think I'm going to put this to 1.5 to make it go faster. And then I'm just going to play the timeline just so it can cache this out. And we'll see that after I cache it out, it's going to go faster a little bit. And let me go back to frame 1, put the display flag back on the pyro block end. And I think the first thing that I'm going to add is a pyro buoyancy. So let's do that. And it's going to be looking for temperature. And let me change the color to match our velocity nodes. Then we have temperature. So let me grab the blend there and throw that in. I'm going to set the direction. I want it to go -z. So it'll be 0, 0, and -1. And then we'll put the scale to 500. And then I think I'm just going to do another uniform force in the same direction, same color. So let's see. 0, 0, -1, and I think I'll just make this -0.6 rather. Oh, actually, I guess it's just 0.6 because it's already in the negative direction. And let's just play this, see what this looks like. Nice, this is starting to look really cool. I'm going to change a few things in this pyro block begin. Let's give it a little bit of padding. And then let's do the clip min Y. I'm going to put that to 0 so it doesn't go below the ground. And then I'm also going to clip it in the min Z. But I think I'm going to do 5. Well, actually, I think that needs to be -5. Let me go check really quickly. Yeah, it needs to be -5. So I'm going to put that to -5. And I think that's good for now. Let's hit play, see what happens. All right, this is starting to look good, but we need to dissipate the temperature. Well, we need to do the density too, but we're going to start off by dissipating the temperature. So I'm going to do a pyro dissipate. And I'm going to plug that in. I think we're actually going to use 2 of them. So if I hit Alt and drag, it'll duplicate it, and then I can shake it to break that connection, and then I'll just drop it back on. And I'm going to recolor those both to be yellow. And for the first one, I'm going to set the dissipation to be 0.99. And then for the other one, I'm going to switch it to subtraction, and I'm going to set it to 1. And I'm basically just copying values from my other scene. And I would highly recommend that you just find values that work for you. So just adjust the settings. And because you get almost real-time feedback, it makes it really easy to see your changes. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I have these settings that I know work just so I can put them in. That way the tutorial isn't going to be like super long of me just testing values to see if they work. But let's go ahead and play this. We can see that the temperature is finally dissipating. And I think I'm going to change the amount of substeps. And the reason why is because it's fairly fast moving. In the final, we used 4, but for now, I'll just use 2. And it's not slowing the simulation down too much right now, but we're getting a little bit better movement in the pyro sim. And now let's go ahead and dissipate the density as well. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use 2 pyro dissipates for the density. And then for the first one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have just a regular dissipation rate. I'm going to do 0.9. Do the same thing. Alt-click to duplicate it, shake it to break the connection, and then drop it back in. And then we're going to swap this over to subtraction rate. And we're going to set this to a value of 3. Perfect. And I think I also made some other changes. I'll just do them really quickly. I think I did mask along axis, and then I did Z, and then -2 to -5. And I just did this so that the dissipation affected this axis range. So basically, I guess from -2 to -5 in the Z is when it really starts happening. And like I said, test whatever settings work for you. I'm just putting these in just because I know they work. And I think that's good for now. And I'm going to go back to the pyro block begin. And I think there's something else I want to change. So I'm going to go to the advection tab. And by default, it has some settings for this one where it says velocity. I want to switch this over to BFECC. And that's, what is it? No, BFECC. Yeah, that's it. And it's going to give us more detail in the simulation. Now, this method of advection is a little bit slower, but it's going to give us more detail. And like I said, if you want, you can test it out. I added some pyro disturbance and some turbulence to the simulation. And it's very visible to tell that you get much more detail with BFECC than the default. So I definitely recommend switching the velocity to this one so that you get more detail. Now, right now, if you play it, you probably won't see much of a difference, and that's just because we haven't added the turbulence yet. But once you start adding that, you'll definitely see a difference. And then something else I'm going to add in, and like the reason why I know to add this in is because I know that later on we're going to have a little bit of issues with this, but I'm going to add in a blur. And let me just check to make sure I'm adding the blur to the right node. So it's going to be after we blend the velocity, we get the maximum. And so I'm just going to blur the velocity just a little bit. And the reason why is because sometimes you kind of get like these grid artifacts on it. So I'm just going to blur it a little bit just to help get rid of it. But don't worry, because we're going to recover that detail by adding some turbulence and some disturbance after on. Like I said, it's kind of strange in making this tutorial because like for example, when I first made this, I didn't add the blur at first. I actually added the turbulence first, and then I started seeing like that grid artifacting. I'm like, oh, well, now I know that I need blur. So then I went back and added this blur node. But since I know we're going to need it later on, I might as well just tell you and then add it in now. But now let's start adding in the turbulence. And I think I'm actually just going to copy the settings from my other scene, and then I'll just show you the settings rather than just typing them all in. So give me one sec. So for this first one, let me just copy this in. Let's see. So the velocity is going to go to the velocity. And then for the control field, we're going to use a control field. And typically you use the temperature, but I'm just going to use the density for this one. And the control field is just going to limit the amount of this effect. And so whenever there's more, in this case, since the control field is going to be density, that means wherever there's more density, there's going to be more turbulence. And like I said, like these settings, I know that they work because I tested them, but I would highly recommend that you just test stuff for yourself. So for let's see, is this enabled? Okay, mask by control field. Okay, perfect. So that's enabled. Oh yeah, of course it's enabled because I copied it from my other scene. And so usually whenever you do turbulence or disturbance, you want multiple levels of it. And so I had named this pyro turbulence small because if you look at the element size is small. And so what I like to do is add multiple levels of these. So the next one that I'm going to add is going to have a bigger element size. And so I gave this one an amplitude of 1, and it looks like that was all I changed. And so let me copy my other one. So pyro turbulence large, and plug that in. And then also again, I use the density as a control field. So let's see, switch my wiring over. Oh no, that makes it harder to see. Keep it on this one. Okay. And then for this one, my element size is 2, and then I have an amplitude of 3. And so this is going to give us a different size turbulence. Like I said, I almost always recommend having multiple sizes. And then it looks like for this one, I made a few adjustments to the control field. Like I said, just do whatever works for you. Mess around. I mean, it's really easy because you're getting feedback in almost real time. So as soon as you make a change, you'll be able to see it. So I highly recommend going around and messing with these settings. And then the last one that I added was a pyro disturbance. And then for this one, instead of using a control field, I use a threshold. And I think for the threshold, let's see. Oh, I used a threshold and control. So for the threshold, you usually use density. So I'm using density for this one. And then for the control, I'm using the temperature. And I'm grabbing the temperature at the end after I've dissipated it. So that's going to cause the disturbance to fade out along with the temperature as it dissipates. And then for the pyro disturbance, I just use a disturbance of 5, a block size of 0.03. The disturbance is what I'm using for the very, very small details. And then obviously you need to make sure you have these on. It looks like I don't have mask by control field on. So I guess it's technically not doing anything because I don't have it enabled. So I guess I could just control field. I guess I technically could just remove that wire because if you don't have this enabled, then it's not doing anything. And then of course you want to take the velocity and then plug it into the velocity here. And let's just see how it looks. Something else that I wanted to add that may not be obvious, but you can adjust these settings as the simulation is running so you can see how they affect the simulation in real time. Oh, I know, I think I made a big mistake. I was gonna say, because it looks super blurry, and I know why. It's because of this blur node. I forgot to turn on scale by time step. Okay, now let's play it. It should have a lot more detail. Yeah, that was definitely the issue. It was getting blurred too much. And so the other thing too is we have we have this pyro disturbance. The block size is 0.3. So in order to better see it and get more detail, I'm probably going to put this voxel size. I think the final thing that I did was like 0.08, but you have to make sure you can handle that because it's on your GPU. So make sure your GPU can handle that before you do it. But let me reset the simulation and play it again. And we're starting to see a lot more detail. And then I think even though it's going to be slower, I know that I had the subsets at 4 on my final, so I'm just going to do that here. And then looking at my settings, looks like I also have the timescale of 1.1, and this just scales it up to make it look like it's going faster. So if you put this at a higher number, the simulation is going to look like it's moving faster. Pretty self-explanatory. So let's just play this and see what it looks like. All right, this is starting to look good. And so we're going to cache this out. So I'm going to go back up to the setup and then let me go check my other scene. The way that I do that, there's many ways you can bake out geometry. You can use the ROP geometry. You can use the file cache node or the labs file cache. But I like just using the simple file node. And so I'm going to go to frame 1 and I'm going to plug this in. And I'm just going to copy this naming scheme that I have over there. And the reason why it's loading something is because it looks like I already have something saved over there. And that's fine. So when you do this, you just won't see anything because you haven't saved anything out yet. And so I'm just doing hip/geo/pyro and then pyro.$f4.bageo.sc. And then the reason why I'm using this file node instead of using a ROP geometry or a file cache node is because because the simulation is going quickly, I want to see the results in the viewport as it's caching out. And so what I'm going to do is go down here and where it says loop, I'm going to do play once so that it only plays the frame range once. And then where it says file mode, I'm going to switch this to write files. And so now instead of reading files, it's going to do write. And so if I hit the play button, it's going to start caching out the simulation to disk. But the benefit, as I mentioned earlier, is that we'll be able to see it in the viewport as it's caching. All right, now that this is finished, I'm going to switch the file mode to read files. And now we can scrub through and see the simulation. Now, something else I want to point out is that if your VDB or if your pyro simulation doesn't look good or high quality, it can be that the quality is being limited in the viewport. So I would go, if you hit D while your mouse is in the viewport, it'll bring up these settings, and then you can go to where it says limit resolution. You can just disable that. And then if you move to the next frame, you can see that the quality got a lot better. So our quality was actually being limited by the viewport, so you can see that's a lot higher resolution. Or if you can just set it to whatever works for you, maybe let me just try 500, 500, and 500. See if that's any better. Or I mean, it won't be better. It'll be faster. When I said better, I guess I meant faster, because right now it's kind of slow to load that. I think for now I'll just keep it low since I'm just recording. So I'll probably just put it back to 200, 200. See what that looks like. Oh, it's fine. All right. I guess I forgot to enable the pyro post process, but that's okay, because I'll probably recache it again anyway. And so I think I'm just gonna make a quick play blast just to see what it looks like. And before I do that, you probably want to make a camera. And I think when I was doing the scene, I did this earlier on, but actually, let me click on this so that it's following the selection again. And then we go in here, and then I'm just gonna put the playhead back on. Well, actually, let me go in here and put the playhead on this joint deform just so that we can see our character. And you can make a new camera. Let me just go back to object level and hopefully our character. Oh crap! Hold on one second. Let me go back. I guess what I need to do is, because yeah, I guess I just need to lock the viewport right there. Yeah, I'll just lock it there, then go back to object level. And you can make a new camera. You can just do file new camera. And then if you want to move your camera in the viewport, you can click this. Like right now, if you move your camera, or if you try to orbit, it'll move outside the camera. And so you can do this lock right there, and then this will lock your camera to the viewport. So as you move it, it'll update the camera. And you can just find something that looks good, find a camera angle that works for you. Now, I already have a camera, so I'm probably just going to copy my camera setup from my other scene and just paste it in here, because you don't want to see me waste time trying to figure out a frame that looks good. So I have that camera, so I'm just going to select my render cam, and I'm just going to disable this so I don't make any changes to it by mistake. And so this is the camera that I have right now. And again, I'm probably going to turn on real time so that it's not going super fast. And awesome. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to turn off this so that it updates the viewport to follow our selection again. And I guess we can turn this on because we're going to cache it again. But for now, I'm just going to do a quick play blast just to see how it looks. And so this is, I guess I went over that quickly or a little bit fast. So if you click on this right here and then you hold it, it says flipbook with new settings. So you can just do that. And then I always like to disable the resolution so that it just does the highest one available. And then I think all these settings are good. Start frame to end frame. And so I'll be back in a second after I'm done play blasting this. All right, here's that play blast, and it's starting to look really good. And I think these settings are good for me, but I would definitely encourage you to mess around and keep working till you get something that looks good. All right, I'm going to close this. And at this point, I would recommend we're going to cache out the high resolution version. So for this one, I'm just going to do 0.008. I think that'll be good enough for this tutorial. And I think everything else, let me hit C to make the colors go away, the color palette go away, and put the display flag back here. And I think everything else is good. So I think I'll just stick with this. This is good enough. And let's see, let's do a null. And then I'm just gonna do out fire. That way it'll be easier to fetch when we create our LOPnet. And then make sure your pyro post process is enabled. And then I'm gonna go back to here, to this file cache node, and let's see, make sure this is play once, and then I'm going to cache this out again. Just hit the play button to start caching. And then I think that's it for this section. In the next section, we're going to look at how to render this out. All right, let's work on rendering this thing out. So I'm going to start out by creating a LOP network, and I'm going to switch my workspace over from build to Solaris, and I'm just going to use a custom desktop that I did. It's always annoying how it switches over to stage, even though I didn't want to use that stage. All right, let me go back, and then I'm going to go into that LOPnet, and I'm going to create a ground plane. And this is going to, I started typing in ground. I always do that. I meant to type in grid. And let's see. I'm going to make that grid just a little bit bigger, and I'm going to check my settings. Okay, 30 by 30. So let's go inside, and I'm going to switch this to 30 by 30. And I'm just going to add some normals. And I want to change where in the scene graph it's going just to organize my USD graph a bit better. And I usually like to group everything under scene. And then I like to put my geometry under geometry. So I'm going to use that naming convention. And so for the import prefix path, I'm going to switch this to /scene, then ground, and then geo. And so I'm going to keep all of my geo under this geometry, and then everything else is going to go under scene. So let's do that, and we can see that this is updated to reflect that. And I'm just going to rename this to ground. And let's just go ahead and add the material for it, because it's going to be really simple. So I'm going to just add a material library, and let's do a karma material builder. And I'm just going to name this to ground MTL for material. Go inside, and I think I'm just going to set the base to 0. Because I don't want any diffuse. It's just going to be reflective. And but like this is just in order to render it the way that I had it. You can obviously do whatever you want. And I think I'm going to put that to 0.1. I'm going to check what I did in my other scene. Yeah, 0.1. I think that's it for this. And then I'm going to hit autofill materials, assign to geometry, and then this little thing right here, the select primitives. If you control click it, it'll bring up this picker. And then I'm just going to select the ground, and then that material is going to be applied. And of course it's black because it's only reflective, and there's nothing else in the scene right now. So, and then also I'm not rendering it. This is just a viewport, so I don't really think reflectivity shows up in the viewport. Let's see. Let's go ahead and import the camera. So I'm just going to type in camera here, and then scene import cameras. And there's our camera. Let me look through it. And I'm just going to use a cache node just to get rid of the time dependency that's on it. Let's see what switches from cache behavior. Always cache all frames. All right, perfect. And let's merge these two together. Nice. Now we have our plane and camera merged. And let's see. Let's go ahead and import the fire. So I'm just going to do sop import. And I'm going to use this picker right here, and let's just choose out fire. And, oh, we're not looking at it. Okay. I'm going to use another merge node and merge that in. All right, I'm going to connect this up. Let's see. I'm getting that warning right there. I'm just going to switch this to merge sop layer into existing active layer, and that warning should go away. And I guess I'll do the fire material after we've gotten the render settings down. So I'm going to type in karma. And I'm going to drop this down. It's going to place the karma and the karma render settings down. I'm going to wire that in. And I'm just going to change some of these basic settings. We're going to be using karma XPU so that it renders nice and quickly on the GPU. And then for the camera, I'm just going to select the render camera that we have. I think that's pretty good for now. And I think I'm going to change the background to be black because it's going to be easier to render, or easier to see what it looks like. So color scheme. Oh, and just to go over that, you put your mouse in the viewport, hit D, and then switch over to background. And then for the color scheme, I'm just going to do dark. And I think I'm going to, okay, looks like I want to change where our fire is, and I'm going to rename it. So I'm just going to name this to pyro. Let's see. Yeah, I'll just name it pyro. And for this path right here, I'm going to go see, what did I do again? Let's check. Okay. So I'm going to do /scene geo and then fire. And so when I select this merge right here, we can see that all of our geometry is under this geo, which is exactly what I want. And so now I can put the display flag on the Karma render settings. And I'm going to switch this. Well, before I do that, let me just click on this arrow so I can collapse that so we can have some more space in the viewport. And for this perspective, let's switch this over to Karma XPU. And I'm going to hide the grid. And of course, it's not looking super great. Our material is working on the ground though, because it's reflecting that. By default, a headlight is added and it doesn't look super great. So let's go ahead and add, well, before we add the light, let's go ahead and do the fire material. So let's do material library over here. And I'm going to go inside and then I'm going to type in pyro. And there's a Karma pyro fire material. And I'm just going to rename this to pyro MTL. And I'm going to hit autofill materials. Then I'm going to do assign to geometry and I'm going to control click this. And I'm going to select our fire. So I'm just going to do volume. That's just a default name. And let's see. I'm going to go inside and let's change some of the settings. And I'm just going to open up my other scene. I'm going to check the settings that I have. So like I said, this right here, you just do whatever you want. You shouldn't copy exactly what I'm doing. I'm just copying my other settings for the sake of this tutorial because I know they look good. So for density, I did 2.2. And then for the smoke color, I brightened it up a little bit. And let's see, I put the shadow density to something a little bit lesser. And it's gonna actually, let's go ahead and add the light right now because it's kind of hard to see what it's gonna look like as long as that headlight is in the scene. So I'm just gonna add this firelight. Yeah, so let's do geometry light and add this in here. Oops, it's frozen. Sorry about that. My computer had crashed, so I hadn't saved it and there was no backup file, so I just had to quickly add those nodes again. I think we're back to where we were when it crashed. So I was adding the firelight. So let's do geometry light and hopefully it doesn't crash this time. I'm not in Karma XPU. I'm in the just a regular Vulkan viewport now. So thankfully it didn't crash. Okay, let's see. So for the primitives, we're going to select the volume. Let's see, you need to make sure that you're selecting the volume primitive, the actual volume primitive. You can't be selecting like the fire. You need to make sure or whatever you have this name, the X form, you need to select the volume itself. So I'm going to hit OK. Hey, I had to import this little clip right here. And the reason why is because after my scene crashed, I copied over my settings from my other scene. And then I realized at the end, I never showed you the rest of the settings I had for the Karma Pyro material. So this is just going to show you those settings that I put in. So let me go over to this material. I think I did show you the density, the smoke color, and then the shadow density, but I don't think I showed you the fire settings. So I'm going to go to the fire and just show you that right now. The things that I did change were the intensity. I put it up to 150. And then for the fire intensity ramp, in order to get this nice crunchy look over here, I like having the ramp go to 0 on both sides. So it's a hill, and you can get that preset by clicking on this gear icon and choosing hill. And then I did move this to the left just a little bit, and then this one to the right a little bit. And then I think I kept everything else the same. As I said earlier, I'd like to encourage you to mess around with settings that work for you, but I did want to at least give you some better fire settings than the defaults, and we can continue. And I'm going to switch back to Karma XPU, and hopefully we don't crash. And it's looking a lot different now, and that's because since we have a light added to our scene, it removed that automatic headlight. And this is looking a lot better. I'm going to just put the exposure up so it's a little bit brighter. And actually, let me just check to see if it's working. Okay, yeah, it is working. All right, let me go back to that other value. And one other thing, I want to switch this to volume because it is a volume. And I think that's good for that. I'm going to add another distant light just so that I can see the smoke a bit better. Let's see, let me just do that right over here. So I'm going to do distant light. And like I said, I'm just going to copy the settings from my other scene, but feel free to do whatever works for you. Looks like I used an intensity of 0.5. And let me just copy in these transform values for the rotation. And I just added this light so that you can see the smoke a little bit better. Oh, let's see. Did I have the right one selected? Oh yeah, I did. Okay. Yeah, so we can see that smoke a little bit better. Maybe I might put it up a little bit higher. And let me click this button just so that the lights don't show in the viewport. Or like the light icon doesn't show. And let's see. I think that's pretty good. I think all we need to do is adjust some of the render settings. So I'm going to switch over to this node, the Karma render settings node. And it's on CPU. And the reason why is because, like I said, my scene had crashed. So I need to go refix these settings. Render cam. Okay. All right. Let's go to limits. Something that you can change here, if you want the light to propagate through the smoke a little bit more, you can change this volume limit. So let me click on this icon so that we can take snapshots. And it looks like I already have snapshots from before, but I'm just going to, well, actually I'm going to delete them. I'm going to take a snapshot and then I'm going to set the volume limit to 3 and let it render. And then I'll take another snapshot so that we can compare them together. All right, let's snap that. And if we compare the two, you can see that the one on the right is much brighter, and that's because it has a higher volume limit. And now just so you know, it can take longer to render. I mean, we can see here, there wasn't that much. It went from 7 to 11. But if you do have a lot of volumes in your scene, it can drastically increase the render times. So I think I'm actually going to keep that because I like how that fire looks. And I think I can turn down my light a little bit. This other light that I created, I'll put it back to what I had, or maybe 0.4. And just so you know, this pyro simulation that I have right here, it's not the same resolution as the render that I previously showed. This is a little bit lower resolution just so that things go faster while I'm doing the tutorial. Let's go back to the Karma settings, and I want to make sure that motion blur is working. So I'm going to go to camera effects, and we can just disable depth of field because we don't need that. And then we're going to make sure motion blur is on, and then we're going to switch velocity blur. We're going to turn that on because we need velocity blur for the volume. And I do believe it's working, but just to make sure, I'm going to put the multiplier up to some insanely high value. And yep, okay, it's definitely working. And I'm just going to click that so that we have more viewport area. And I think that's pretty much it. Let me check now that if you want to control how fast, and I guess not fast. Well, I mean, it does control the speed, but the quality, you can control the quality by changing these path trace samples. Like if I put this to 10, it's going to render really quickly like it's already done, but there's a lot of noise. I think for this one, the default's actually not too bad. And even though there is some noise, we can clean up that noise by using, if we go to image output and then filters, we can use the Intel denoiser. That's what I used for the render that I did. I used the Intel denoiser. I think it works pretty well. And then I did leave the resolution at 1280 by 720 just for the sake of it rendering faster as I'm doing this tutorial, but feel free to change that to something else. And I think that's pretty much it. The only other things that you would need to change would be the output picture, so you can choose the name and where you want it to go. And then to render it out, you would select this USD render ROP, and then where it says valid frame range, you would click on this, and then you can just do specified frame range. And then you can just, if you want to set a custom value, you can do delete channels and then set your frame range and then hit render to disk. I think that's pretty much it. This wasn't meant to be a super in-depth look into Solaris. This was just how to quickly render the pyro simulation that you did. Thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want the scene file, you can download it for free from Patreon.